saying that it is one of the areas that I am pushing real hard, because I can see opportunity, not just for us as a country to be food secure, but I also can see opportunity for creating jobs. They will tell you in Kenya that we are now expanding markets. We are expanding county aggregation and industrial parks, where we want to use our agricultural produce to create value, to create jobs in the agricultural industrial parks, to create value through value addition and agro-processing and manufacturing that would not only enhance incomes for our farmers, but create opportunities for employment for our young people, create opportunities for enterprise in agricultural products, and also create opportunities for export. I'm just giving you one example. Second example is in the space around what other opportunities can we leverage in terms of smart cities, green development. How do we, in a very sustainable way, have settlements that do not compromise on pollution? We have huge pollution coming out of cities. We have huge threats to polluting the air, polluting the environment that come from unsustainable settlements. It is the reason why Kenya, for example, is focused on a new model of housing that would only get almost 7 million people who live in Kenya today out of the slums into decent settlements with dignity, but would also give opportunity again to the young people to get jobs. It is our intention in Kenya, for example, to create 1 million jobs out of our smart housing plan. Again, it's how do we have climate smart, climate responsive interventions, even as we solve problem of food security, even as we solve problems of unemployment. How do we do it in a way that respects the environment and gives us an opportunity to combine development, growth, together with a livable globe? So that is what I would suggest going forward. I can give you another 2 examples, but I think I'll take a lot of time. Let me leave that there. Let me come back to chicken. My passion. And I remember Bill Gates, one of the richest people on earth, said the best way to deal with poverty is chicken farming. That's Bill Gates. Yeah, so I want you to listen to that carefully. And in that space, you have an opportunity in the whole farming arena. I have listened to Adesina many times, and he says the next billionaires will be billionaires around farming. I've heard you say that, Adesina. Have you changed your mind?
No, it's true.
It's true. He says he still believes it is. So that is the space that not only gives us an opportunity to have a globe that is food secure, but also creates real value, real jobs, real enterprises, and real wealth, if I may say that, real wealth. So the investments are modest. The technology is available on what you need to do. The raw materials are local, and the technology, including know-how, is also local. Chicken farming is not something new. It's been here for us for decades. And the markets are also available. In fact, chicken is the cheapest source of protein. So if you're looking for the cheapest source of protein, do chicken farming. And if you're looking at sustainability, that you need to get the easiest, the cheapest route to making sure that we have the proteins to support our growth. And in any case, let me conclude by saying 25% of the world's labor force will come from the African continent by 2030. 40% of the world's workforce will come from the African continent by 2050. That world labor force has to be healthy and fed. And that is why chicken farming is central to us providing cheap proteins, healthy living for the future labor force, and that is the young people of our continent.
And I will tie it up with a question from Central African Republic. We have a question.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, et merci pour ce que vous faites pour les jeunes africains. Alors, ma question est la suivante. D'abord, mon nom c'est Dédi Roland Olivier, je viens de la Côte d'Ivoire, je suis délégué ivoirien et j'ai été sélectionné pour participer à cette conférence. Alors, ma question est la suivante. Comment les dirigeants africains peuvent-ils faire pression pour améliorer l'accès des jeunes entrepreneurs dans le domaine de l'économie verte? Merci beaucoup.
We can translate quickly, Your Excellency. So to quickly translate, how can African leaders possible to enhance access to finance and resources for young entrepreneurs in the green economy? Thank you.
Thank you for that translation. First, let me start by congratulating my dear brother, His Excellency, the President Ruto. Please give it up for him. I think Africa needs a lot of young presidents, and I think he's a great example of that. And what you do not know, two things. He told me that coming for this event, that there wasn't going to be a formal attire, and of course, you know me that I have to come with my bow ties all the time. And so I hope you still recognize this additional here. It's just without a bow tie. Mr. President, thank you for that. Elizabeth, thank you to all of you and the Youth Climate Assembly for all the phenomenal work that you are doing. What many of you may not know is when the President was talking about agriculture, he and I go way, way back when he was Minister of Agriculture in Kenya. And I was then Vice President at Agriculture. We used to meet in my office very, very early. And actually, it was he and I who brainstormed and figured out how we could turn agriculture into something that could be financed by banks. And that's what led to what's called Kilimo Plus here, and eventually Kilimo Biashara. So which means agriculture is a business. Let me start with the first question, and I'll take the next question at the end. First is this assembly itself. This is a major development for Africa, as the President has said. We've got 425 million Africans that are between the age of 15 and 34. But that means that this is the best asset that Africa has. Your ideas, your creativity, your perspectives, your innovations, your entrepreneurship capacity is what we need to drive the economic growth. The question you asked about economic growth and development. It has to be inclusive. But you can't do it without, you have to do it with. And so the President said it, and I agree with him. You are not bystanders. You should be decision makers. Look, if you run a corporation, the most important part of your corporation are your shareholders, the equity holders in the company, right? Now, the youth are the biggest equity holders on this continent. And therefore, when we talk about economic development, economic policies, about programs and financing, we have to put the youth primarily at the center of everything that we do. Second, it's not just about talking about the youth, Mr. President. It's about delivering for them. I go across so many countries and I hear people say, well, you know, we're trying to empower the youth. And I'm sorry, I'm not one of those that actually believe in that word empowerment, the way they say it. Because rarely do I find young people that come to me and say, I've been empowered. So it seems to me that those that are talking empowerment probably are empowering themselves for political reasons. For the youth. The youth need investment, period. They need a lot of finance. And financing agriculture, as the president was saying, is the fastest way to do it. Can I see by a show of hand anybody in agriculture here? Okay, not a whole lot. But I'm going to tell you, nobody smokes gas. Nobody drinks oil. Everybody eats food. So the biggest business in the world is the business of food. And as the president said, 65% of all the uncultivated arable land left in the world is not in Asia, not in Latin America, not in Europe, it's in Africa. So what we do with agriculture in Africa, we determine the future of food in the world. So I want to see those hands go up a lot, because I really believe the future billionaires of Africa will not come from oil and gas, they will come from the agricultural sector. Just to tell you how passionate we are with this, President Ruto and I attended the Heads of State Summit we had in Senegal, in Dakar, where we put together, my brother here is here, Patrick Bakwejan, that we are working together with the Global Center on Adaptation. We put together a compact on how Africa will feed itself and do so with dignity. Development is not about talking, it's about doing, and you have to develop pride. And there's no pride in telling yourself as a father, well, just go to the neighbor to go and feed your kids. No, Africa has to feed itself. It has to feed itself with dignity. Within 3 days, we have, I think, Mr. President, we have 34 heads of state and government there. 34 heads of state. President Ruto was there. We were able to mobilize $72 billion to support food and agricultural development compacts that will make Africa fully unlock the full potential of its agriculture. And that is what's going to power our economy forward, transform our rural areas, give our youth quite a lot of jobs, and so on. I also want to say something about the issue of energy. And I thought we were going to come back into that, because the question was about what are those areas that can power the economy. God is good to Africa. God loves Africa. Can I hear amen somewhere? Amen. We got sunlight. 11 terawatts of sunlight. The largest in the world, 60% in the world. We have hydro. We have geothermal right here. You're doing a fantastic job, Mr. President, on geothermal right here. And we also have wind. So we have to turn that into energy to power ourselves. You know, energy is like is the backbone of your body. If you have it, you can stand straight. If you don't have it, you can't stand straight. You've got to really make sure that we power Africa. And that's why for us at the African Development Bank, we put in $25 billion to make sure Africa can fully power itself. And back to the issue of finance. I'm a banker. When you go to a bank and you're trying to look for finance as a young people, what do you hear? What do they tell you? Can somebody say something? Collateral, risk. They look at the young people and they think they are risky. No. The biggest risk on this continent is not investing in the youth. That's the biggest risk. And so what we have to do is take our financing, our financial ecosystem, and make sure that we use them to support our youth. I feel sad when I see young people going to Mediterranean. For where? I don't think the hope and aspirations of Africa's youth is not in the United States, it's not in Canada, it's not in UK, it's not in Asia, it's not in Latin America. It must be in an Africa growing well and able to support the youth. And that's why we at the African Development Bank have launched what's called Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks. Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks are new financial institutions, folks. These are not any other type of institutions. They will create a new financial ecosystem around the businesses of the youth. And Mr. President, they will support them in the life cycle of their businesses. We need to create on this continent youth-based wealth. When people talk about malaria, I don't like the word poverty at all. Why must we be the museum of poverty in the world? If you have malaria and you go to hospital, and a doctor tells you, well, I'll alleviate your malaria, you better run away. Alleviate malaria, you have to cure malaria. The same thing with poverty. We should get poverty out of our mindset. We need to create a wealthy continent, and that wealth must start with creating wealth for our youth. We must create youth-based wealth on our continent. And Mr. President, I just want to commend you for what you said you were doing about housing. I come into this morning, I saw the president driving in with, your electric vehicle. And also, he's a very innovative president, very creative president, very determined president. When he was telling me about the issue of housing, I told the president, I said, Mr. President, Kenya, when it's long distance racing, Kenyans will win gold, silver, and bronze together. But when it comes to slums, I told Mr. President, why do we have Kibera slum? Why do we have all these slums? And people say, no, we have to upgrade the slum. No, there's no five-star slum. A slum is a slum. And so I want to commend the president for his bold decision to do that. And I say that because it will create jobs, it will support the young people, it will help you to have an economy that's growing well, equitably, and can actually grow faster. So well done, Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you very much for coming to my support on this. Housing fund through Parliament, and it was quite something. I'm very happy that people like yourself appreciate what that means. The jobs we'll create, the opportunities we'll create, the enterprises that come with it. You know, many people think of a house as 4 walls and a roof. It's not. They're huge industries that would create doors, that would create windows, that would create... We're going to create millions of enterprises in that space. We're going to employ millions of young people. We're going to get rid of informal settlements. We have 1,410 slums in Kenya. We need to get rid of them. There is no upgrading of any slum. There is no 5-star slum, as you say. And that's what I'm telling the great people of Kenya, that we have an opportunity to transform our country. It's doable. It is feasible. We must get it done. Thank you.
Yes, and indeed, the young people from across the African continent have that opportunity and are driving Africa's green growth agenda. And I like what you said, Dr. Adesina, around investing in the young people. And I'll come back to Your Excellency. When you spoke in Paris in front of the Eiffel Tower, you talked about one of the greatest opportunities and one of the major things that the African continent brings to the table. And among the 3 things you mentioned in Paris was the young people. And I want to open this question to Morocco to let us know how we can unlock and make sure that our young people, in line with this, do not have the barriers that exist to enable them to also get into the decision-making places, but to also enable them to navigate the spaces where they can drive Africa's green growth agenda. And in line with Africa's most important resource, the young people, I want to open the next question to Morocco, Sad.
How can we mobilize international resources and support to address the increased vulnerabilities in our continent and empower our young and local communities?
I invite His Excellency to respond to the question.
Thank you very much for that question. I will answer it in 2 ways. Number 1 is the realization that we are a young continent. And I like what the president of the African Development Bank has said. Investing in our shareholders. The largest shareholders of Africa is the young people. What must we do? We must continuously invest in the young people, number one, in their education. In Kenya, for example, this year, we had the largest budget, 630 billion Kenya shillings, the largest since independence, to fund our education. Because that creates people, that creates a young people in Kenya who have the requisite knowledge, who can articulate their issues, who can drive their growth. That's number one. Making sure that they are skilled. This year, we doubled the budget for our TVETs, for our technical and evaluation. We doubled the budget almost, maybe, we actually increased by 70% for our universities. Again, to invest in our young people so that they are ready to tackle the challenges of the future. And number three, what Adesina said, investing and believing in young people, not looking at them as part of the problem, but looking at them as part of the solution, not looking at them as risky, not looking at them with the eyes of they don't have collateral. It is the reason we are going to invest. We've already started the journey. We've invested the first 15 billion. We have another 10 billion this year that we are investing in making sure that young people have access to credit. The Hustler Fund in Kenya, 67% of the borrowers on the Hustler Fund are below the age of 35. The Hustler Fund today has lent 35 billion. And I saw one of the newspapers say the other day that the government, that 3 billion has not been paid. That is true. But 3 billion out of 35 billion lent, I would take another risk with the young people of Kenya. I would do it again. I would do it again. Because slowly we are turning the corner. The Hustler Fund today does not need any collateral. You don't have to know nobody. You don't have to know your village head, or you don't have to have a fat relative or a tall friend. You just need a phone and yourself. And I have kept on saying, you need a committee of two, your phone and yourself, and you have access to some measure of credit. We're scaling it up now by another 10 billion shillings, and it speaks to what Adesina was saying, investing in the ideas of our young people, investing in and believing in the young people of Kenya, as we do of the young people of this globe. And to go to the question my good friend has said from Morocco, where are we taking this into the global stage? What financing are we looking for? It is the reason why we are saying today our debt as a continent is in the region of $700 billion. We are paying every year about $70 billion in terms of servicing interest and servicing debt. Many countries are going down the route of debt distress. Already, 9 countries in Africa are down the cliff. 13 are classified as high risk. Another 17 are classified as a moderate risk. Debt distress is a big juggernaut that is threatening the future of our continent and the future of our development and prosperity. Number 2, we need to think about new and design, let me say, design new financing instruments. And I'm very happy that the young people in this Africa Youth Summit 2023 have said we need a green bank where more voices, more those of us who are not represented in the current multilateral development banks, we are not represented at the moment, where we will be represented, where we will have a voice, where the young people of our continent, the greatest stakeholders of our continent, will have a voice. That is where we need to take this. We need to reform the current multinational development banks, and we need to redesign a new green bank that makes sure that we have resources that not only fund our growth and green development, but it is done so fairly. It is done so with speed, and it is done so with affordable interest. In fact, I dare say, like we say in Kenya, mambo ni matatu. Number one, it must be with speed. It takes inordinate time to access credit. Number two, it must be at scale. Sometimes you get little monies here and there that cannot make any meaning. And number three, it must be affordable. So it must be, number one, it must be with speed, it must be at scale, and it must be affordable. Mambo ni matatu.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Excellency. And I would like to unlock on the risk component as well.
Yeah, let me say that your president represents Africa so well on the global scale. If you listen to him in Paris, we're there together in Paris, where we are talking about the need to reform the global financial architecture. It's not just, you can have a seat around the table. It's not your seat around the table that matters. It's your voice. It's the fact that your voice is respected, your perspectives are taken into consideration, and their priorities are directed to what's important to you. And I think I want to thank the president for doing so well for us in Paris. And Patrick, you were there, and we saw what the president did there. Now, I want to make 3 points with regard to the question for... First is, we have to put our monies where our mouths are. The African Development Bank, together with the Global Center on Adaptation, we have a program that's called Youth Adapt. And Patrick and I, at the COP27, with my team, we actually have been financing this. We put in $4 million, Mr. President, into this, supporting ideas and businesses of young people. Yeah, basically seed financing. And eventually, if those businesses then work, then they are able to get a little bit more financing. Eventually, they get a growth capital to grow their businesses. We've done now, I think, 33 businesses in 19 countries. And I can tell you that those businesses, they've increased their profit by 200%. 20% of them are expanding their business into other parts of Africa. And one thing I'd like to say here, Mr. President, is that from the African Development Bank and from the Global Center on Adaptation, we are determined to do exactly what you say, is take it to scale. Put our monies there. So I'm very pleased to announce to you today, and I will say it at the main plenary, that the African Development Bank and the Global Center on Adaptation will launch a $1 billion Youth Adapt initiative that will provide, Mr. President, financing for seed financing. It will also provide growth capital for big businesses that will come out of that. It's a big thing for the young people of Africa. Second is, we talked about how we are going to finance Africa in responding to climate change issues. President Ruto doesn't believe in complaining. I don't believe in complaining either. We have to find a way in which we mobilize resources ourselves. There are 3 things that we are doing. First, again, the African Development Bank, together with the Global Center on Adaptation, we've launched what's called the African Adaptation Acceleration Program, which is the largest program, by the way, on climate adaptation in the world. We know that adaptation is our challenge. We only contributed 3% to global emissions, but we suffer disproportionately from that. We're not going to be waiting for others just for that. We have to put our monies there. Okay, the climate is back on this one. Okay, good. And so this particular AAAP, we call it, African Adaptation Acceleration Program, is to mobilize $25 billion to support adaptation in Africa, to support building resilience into infrastructure, which Mr. President talked about, whether it's water, whether it's housing, whether it's energy, and so on, and also supporting young businesses in terms of green businesses that can create a lot of green jobs for us. The other thing that we are doing at the African Development Bank on this is for climate adaptation. We have launched what's called Climate Adaptation Window, Mr. President, under the African Development Fund, and which Kenya is a big contributor to the African Development Bank. And this is to now has $429 million that will support us to provide 20 million farmers with access to crop insurance and livestock insurance. Another 20 million farmers to have access to climate-resilient agricultural technologies to build their resilience. Then to essentially regenerate 1 million hectares, Mr. President, of degraded land and all that. So this is a very, very big investment that we are making. And finally, I want to say something about, as a kid, I know your mother, you were selling things as a kid. I was selling things also as a kid. My mother told me something, that the way when you go to the market and you're selling something, the way you present what you are selling is the way people buy it. What I'm saying by that is this. Africa has the biggest carbon lungs in the world, which is the Congo Basin. Bigger than Amazon. And now, but if you look at how we are valuing our wealth, biodiversity, carbon sequestration, Mr. President, is not valued. So all of what we're doing, sequestering carbon for the rest of the world, has no value. Somebody says, well, I will do for you a voluntary carbon market, which is basically, greenwash my conscience, give you a little bit there, give you a little bit there. No, we don't want that. We want the wealth of Africa to be recalibrated based on what we have. And if you take the forest, if you take the carbon that we are sequestrating, I can tell you then the GDP as a measure of wealth, Mr. President.
Include our renewable assets.
Renewable assets.
And all that.
Yes. If we took that, Mr. President, then the GDP is just a measure of value of goods and services and economy produces. But you are not measuring our carbon stocks. It's over there. We are saving the world. We are not getting any benefits from it. When I used to work here in Kenya, somebody came to my office and said, we want you to support farmers. I was then at Agra and Rockefeller Foundation. We want you to support farmers to plant trees because of carbon. I said, how much are you going to pay them? He said, $1 per ton. I said, look, come on. What we are saying is we must have a local carbon market ourselves, an African carbon market, price our carbon properly, and make sure then that our GDP takes into consideration, it's adjusted based on the positive externality we have. Then the value of our GDP, if it takes into consideration the value of our forest, the carbon stock and so on, will be so high. Then our debt to GDP ratio will go down. Then we can borrow more money to do all the things that we are talking about, green financing, that we are saying here today. That is how the lesson of my mother is influencing what I do as president of the bank. The way you put a value on your own resources is what others are going to do for it. And Mr. President, if we are able to do that, we'll be much wealthier. And we'll be greener. We'll turn all our economies green. And we'll be properly valued. So the point I want to say, and I'm going to hand it over to my dear friend, Mr. President, is, Mr. President, let's now work to make sure that we develop the methodologies for us to be able to properly value our carbon, our natural capital. Our natural capital alone can be up to $6.5 trillion. And so what are we doing with poverty if we do that properly? So I think that the issue for us, the President and I, is not working in the margin. We're working already with the Global Center on Adaptation on that and other partners, how we are going to re-estimate our GDP based on the value of our natural capital. People tell me, oh yes, we need to do debt for nature swap. Yes, okay, debt for nature swap. But if that value, if that nature is that important, why is it not part of my wealth? Permanently. And so if there's something, Mr. President, I think we should really take up for our continent that would transform our continent from just depending a little bit here, a little bit there. Let's value our natural capital properly. It could be up to $6.5 trillion. I'll be done with all these things of begging others for our development. Let's develop with pride.
I couldn't agree with you more, my brother. I couldn't agree with you. I mean, you've just said what should be said on top of rooftops by everybody. We are not a poor continent. We must change the narrative. Africa is not the poor continent. It's not the desperate continent. It's not the continent of disease and poverty. We need a different, we are a wealthy continent. And we need to properly value our assets. And I agree with you, 1/3 of the world's sequestration of carbon is in this continent. The world's sequestering 30 billion gigatons of CO2. And we're getting nothing for it. And we're getting no value for it. It's not in our books. It's not in our asset register. Right? We have 60% of the world's renewable assets. We have 60% of the world's solar potential. It is not in our asset book. And that is why we are classified as being this rich when we are that rich. So what we are saying is we are going to drive a new narrative for the African continent. It is our responsibility to do it. Some people may not be happy with it. That's their problem. We're going to do it because it is our place. It is in our place to profile our assets positively. And that is the reason why on Friday, a few hours before I came to open this youth conference, I signed into law the carbon market law in Kenya, where we are going to profile our carbon assets properly. We're not going to take peanuts. It's not going to be $10. It's going to be it's not going to be $1. It's not going to be what Adesina was saying. We are going to have a carbon market that is priced at world prices. And that's how we're going to trade. Our carbon assets must count for our assets. It must count for the correct values. It is the reason why in the same bill, I made sure that the Climate Council that will be in charge is front and center, has youth representatives, because they are our future. They are the people who have the greatest stake in our future. And if we do not manage climate change, it will destroy the future of our countries and put at risk the future of our young people. Adesina, Mr. President, you have our support. We will do this together. And I want to challenge the young people who are here. Listen, you are the biggest asset that not just Africa, but the globe has. The president, for example, of Germany came to Kenya 2 months ago, and he asked me directly, we need 250,000 young people to work for us in Germany. Right? That's our asset. So you are the biggest asset, not just for our countries, but for the globe. That's why I was saying the young people we have in this room and those outside this room are the asset that we have. You will form 25% of the global workforce. You will become 40% of the global workforce by 2050. And therefore, you need to appreciate your place in this equation. And that is why you need to be part of this conversation. And we're going to work with you. I have undertaken the request you have made that the youth aspect must not just be on the periphery. It must be part of the conversation. And I'm going to take it to the AU that every AU discussion must have youth representatives. I want you to prepare yourselves. I know we have a youth champion, the president of Burundi. We are in discussion with him, and we are going to make sure that the next summit of the Africa Union must have youth not as being attendees or in the periphery, but with a statement on what they think AU should do, what they think AU should represent as we go into the future, because you are the greatest asset. Secondly, let me ask you, as the young people of our continent, to help us break the barriers of countries and borders of countries that has allowed inefficiencies, that has promoted corruption and impunity in our countries, denying this continent the huge potential that we have. Young people, with the technology that we have, with the communication that we have, with the social media that has broken barriers, we can form one huge movement that will transform our continent and unlock the potential that Africa represents. I hope you take up that challenge and provide that leadership. We will work with you.
Mr. President, I think one of the biggest opportunity we have right now is actually within the context of this assembly and in the same narrative about how we can showcase Africa's resources to even attract the capital investments. And you've spoken very highly of the component of even willing to take the risks for young people. Because in the context of climate finance and as we restructure our global financial architecture, how do these resources now trickle down to our young people at the grassroots levels? And I'm just curious, Mr. President, and also Mr. President of the Africa Development Bank, what do you think about the declaration and the components of the agendas that we are putting forward in terms of systemic embedment? Is it too ambitious, or what's your thought about what we are pushing for to actually be part of the system and at the table?
With your permission, Mr. President. First and foremost is that if you look at financing, we are Africa's largest financial institution. And since I've been president, I've said that development, if you take African Development Bank, the most important part of that for me is not the bank part, it's the development part. And you can't develop if you're not having equitable growth. And you can't develop if you're not being able to include these 425 million people, into our process and let them have ideas, creativity, their businesses, we put finance behind them and make it work. If we are not incorporating youth into all of our programs at the bank. And that's why I made the decision to set up at the bank a presidential youth council that advises me as president of the bank. Some of them may be here today. And what that has done is not just advice. It's really totally changed how we do business for the youth in the bank. Today, we set out by saying, Mr. President, that we were going to help jobs. We were talking about the issue of jobs just now. How do we do it? We have 11 to 12 million youth entering the labor market every year, and only 3 million of them are getting jobs. And then people get on the rickety boat and they head to the Mediterranean. For what? And so we decided at the bank that we are going to actually make sure that we are creating jobs in every single project for the youth. We set out a youth strategy to create 25 million jobs for youth and to skill up 50 million young people on the continent. We started in 2016. To date, we have done 15 million jobs. 5 million of those are formal and 10 million of those are informal. But beyond that, and that is just a portfolio of about $27 billion. Now we made another decision, Mr. President, that together with the International Labour Organization, we're putting in place a youth and jobs, it's like an index, right? For a marker, if you wish, for every project in the African Development Bank. I want to make sure at the African Development Bank, 100% of all our financing, all our projects have youth base inside of them. And that's the way we are going to be a youth responsive bank, a youth accountable bank, a youth accountable continent. We really have to, it comes down to money. It's not just talk. You have to have money to support the young people. And I just want to say that for the young people here, please count on President Ruto, count on me to be your champion for what you have presented here today. First, I can tell you for the first thing that you mentioned, which is for the youth secretariat, you were saying for the first one, the African Development Bank will provide finance for that secretariat for you. The second is, as I mentioned, in what we are doing together with the Global Center of Adaptation, the $1 billion facility, we will make sure that we work with you as we go to COP28 to make sure that youth are involved in every single part of that. And the last thing that I also want to say is the women. You know, I remember, Mr. President, in 1994, I was flying from Abidjan to Nigeria. And when I got to Nigeria, I was flying back from Nigeria back to Abidjan. I got on the plane, this Air Afrique, we used to have Air Afrique at that time. When I got on the plane, there were so many women, market women, on the plane. They were carrying baskets, a lot of clothing and so on. And I realized that they all look very, very fat, like this. Don't get me wrong. And so they were taking baskets off their head, they were putting it into the overhead compartment. And I had at that time a compact, you know, the compact, the one that is like a briefcase, a suitcase. And that's all I had. And I said, I need a space for that. And the hostess looked at me and said, how many times do you fly this plane? I said, maybe once in every 3 months. He said, the women you see here, they may look like illiterate to you. They run this business. Please give us your luggage. We're going to put it in the hold. Make more place for the women. Make more room for the women. I never forgot that. When I became president of the bank, I determined that we must create a facility to support businesses of women on this continent. It's called Affirmative Finance Action for Women, to mobilize $5 billion for businesses of women on this continent. And last year, we have done $1.2 billion of payout to 44 institutions. So I just want to say that as we think about climate, as we think, Patrick, about the whole issue of green jobs and green businesses, let's make sure that we are incorporating women businesses into every single thing we do, because when women win in Africa, Africa wins.
Just to buttress what Adesina has said, are you guys over ambitious? I think that's a question from Elizabeth. I want to tell you, on ambition, you're better off getting 10% of the 100 you looked for than getting 100% of 10 you are looking for. So your ambition is perfectly in place. You need to drive it, because that will, and that is what, your ambition is what is going to unlock the potential that exists today. And therefore, we're going to hold your hand, we're going to work with you, and we're going to make sure that what you see as the possibilities of the future becomes the realities of tomorrow. And we should be able to work together in that direction. As Adesina has said, what is it that we need to do to unlock that potential? Talking about women, you know, one of the biggest campaign issues in Kenya in the last election was a lady called Mama Mboga. It was quite, you know, a discussion and what's happening to her. And I want to say proudly that today, because of Mama Mboga, we're building 500 new markets, fresh produce markets across Kenya, to make sure that that Mama Mboga has a decent place to conduct their business that has dignity, that has space, electricity, water, and as I said, most importantly, dignity. That same Mama Mboga has access to credit. And through the county aggregation industrial parks, she will also be able to progress her business into value addition, into manufacturing in that space, all the way to export. This is the kind of deliberate, and let me repeat this, creating jobs, creating enterprise, creating opportunities is not a by-the-way issue. We must be intentional, we must be deliberate, and we must have real, tangible programs that create those opportunities. That's why when I speak to the people of Kenya, I tell them, if we are going to create jobs, it's not just growing the economy, because you can grow the economy without creating jobs. It's possible. You know, you have 5%, 7% growth, and you talk about it and people are asking, so where is this economy growing? Because they can't feel it. And that is why we are saying creating jobs must be intentional. That's why we have housing. That's why we are working on our digital job space. That's why we are working on export of labor. That's why we are working in all those places, because we need to be deliberate, intentional about creating those opportunities. We must create opportunities for growing income. They must be deliberate. So again, as you say, your ambition is in the right place. We will unlock that ambition using deliberate, intentional programs that will unlock that potential.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. I now want us to go to Namibia, Uganda, and Mauritius as well. And I want to request Mariah to take the stage. Maria from Namibia.
Question is to the President. Do you have any thoughts on the new negotiation agenda item on just transition programs and how Africa should position itself in these conversations? Thank you.
We'll also take the Uganda and Mauritius question together, and Your Excellency, you will respond all the same. Rose, Uganda.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for joining us. My name is Rose Constantino, I'm an immigration development advocate. When the FD President was talking about migrants, and I'm coming in with the question there. First of all, I'd like to share that over 10 million people have already been displaced from sub-Saharan Africa due to climate-related events. And with no action, 86 million will be displaced by 2050. And we know that, I'm not going to explain this, we know what is happening in Somalia with the delayed rain seasons for 5 consecutive seasons. And we know that the recent floods in Rwanda, over 35 people died and 20,000 have been displaced. Most of these people displaced are displaced within our borders, within our countries, our neighboring countries. But also we have those who are trying to cross the Mediterranean. And last month, 41 young people drowned in the ocean. And but there is no legal explore in other frameworks that recognize these people being displaced by climate change. Last year, the government of Uganda, the government of Kenya, and the International Organization for Migration organized the Kampala Ministerial Conference, and then it resulted in the Kampala Declaration on Migration, Environment, and Climate Change. And we hope that all other states will sign it during the Africa Climate Week. Mr. President, my question to you is, how do you see the implementation of safe relocation and mobility programs, safe and regular migration as an adaptation option, and also picking on the continental free trade area, but also the free movement of persons protocol? Thank you.
We have that question from Mauritius, and then Your Excellency will respond.
Can she repeat that again? We didn't get Mauritius.
So my question was, seeing the economic importance, especially for small island development states such as Mauritius, how can Africa and Africans promote, leverage, and ensure sustainable tourism strategies, knowing that us, small island developing states, have faced very unique challenges and vulnerabilities when it comes to climate change? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Starting with Maria and just transition from Botswana, is it? Yes. So the conversation around just transition is a present conversation. It is a conversation that's a must-have, because the balance that the conversation tries to address is it feasible? Is it reasonable? Is it bankable for us for the transition to happen from fossil fuel to green energy? And let me give you a practical example from Kenya. It is possible to run our grid using green energy, renewable energy. 93% of Kenya's grid is green or renewable. So are we funding it? Can we support our development? Yes. So, but we need a candid conversation as to what happens to countries that have huge resources of fossil fuel energy, and how do we transition those that are exploiting those resources at the moment into the green space. One of the aspects that we must address is the aspect of financing and technology. Those two will unlock the potential we have in green energy if we have technologies, and we're very happy. A lot of movement has gone in developing technologies that would help us unlock the renewable energy potentials, but also financing. And that is why we are having a very big conversation about financing. So those two will make it easier for us to have that conversation about just transition. On the aspect of migration, Kenya has already signed into the Kampala Declaration. I did speak to President Museveni this morning about it, because it's going to be part of the conversation we are going to have in the summit. This summit will provide an opportunity for countries that haven't signed into the Kampala Declaration. That makes it much more easier for victims of floods, droughts, victims of climate change to find safe haven. We must, as humanity, realize that climate change is not, for example, our making as Africa. It is not the making of ordinary citizens. we're here together. And we must make it much more easy for people to find safe haven when they are victims of climate change, whether it's drought, whether it is cyclones, whether it is what you're talking about, the flood, the mudslides in Rwanda, the big challenge we had in Mozambique, in the western part of Kenya, or for that matter, the drought in Kenya, and Somalia, and Ethiopia, where we lost close to 9.5 million heads of livestock in the Horn of Africa. We must make it much more easy for us to attend to those who have to move away from situations